In the long run, Horizon Robotics could evolve into something like ARM plus Android, and D-Robotics could become the NVIDIA of the robotics world, one focused on underlying IP, the other on chips plus an operating system layer. If you are only thinking about this generation of product in an industry, and your customers won't use what you want to build next, you can treat it as a sales activity, but you shouldn't treat it as a strategic choice.
Right now, we are focusing heavily on the VA direction. That might sound counterintuitive, because we believe that in many scenarios, what people are actually using VLA for is single-task execution. If you want to ship something today, the most reliable path is VA, and it costs 1/10 of what VLA costs, both in training and data.
I've talked to Caillou about this a lot. The most important thing for a company is never fundraising. Money matters, sure, but it's probably the least important thing. You have to get your mindset right. A hero on a mission doesn't chase rabbits.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Alphaist podcast. I'm Peter Chen. Alphaist is a new fund focused on hard tech. Our mission is to empower alpha founders to propel humanity forward. The Alphaist is an in-depth conversation show. We focus on the first principles of technology and entrepreneurship, highlighting early-stage entrepreneurs, engineers, and product explorers who are changing the world. Today I want to share a startup story that really resonates with me personally. Not long ago, D-Robotics announced a $120 million Series B1 round, followed by a $150 million B2, bringing the total B round to $270 million. In embodied intelligence, arguably the most watched space in tech right now, D-Robotics may be the most unusual player. It doesn't build robots, it builds the intelligence backbone for everyone who does. But rather than start with the funding or the product, I want to start with how Cong Wang and I first met 6 years ago when I was leading a new round of investment into Horizon Robotics at 5Y Capital. Our two guests today are Cong Wang, CEO of D-Robotics, and Wei Sui, VP of Algorithms at D-Robotics. He previously worked on autonomous driving algorithms at Horizon and joined D-Robotics at the end of 2023. He'll join us shortly. Cong Wang, could you say hi to everyone and introduce yourself and D-Robotics?
Hi everyone, I'm Cong Wang from D-Robotics. D-Robotics spun off in 2024, so we've been independent for a little over 2 years now. We're building what we call the Windows of the robotics era, the full hardware-software foundation that empowers all kinds of customers and developers.
You were in your 4th year of a PhD program in the US when you decided to drop out and start a company. How did you make that call?
I left in 2015, partly because what I was studying in the PhD program had very little real-world value, and partly because my personality is more suited to working with people and getting into industry.
That first entrepreneurial experience starting in 2015 was relatively short-lived. What impact did it have on you?
I've always been someone who likes to charge out and try things I've never done before. That experience pushed me beyond being just a function. I got to run through the full loop, what a company should do, what it can do, what's actually possible, and how to close the whole cycle. Back then, I didn't know anyone, yet I had the guts to do cold outreach to a bunch of finance heavyweights to learn about a field I knew nothing about.
Before that, you'd been in school your whole life? That was your first time stepping from academia into business.
Right? One thing I've always been pretty bold about is trying things I don't know without much fear.
So why did you decide to join Horizon in 2018?
Back then, AI was basically glorified outsourcing for enterprises. Keep the client happy, deliver what they ask for, and you're done. But what I always wanted was to turn AI into a standalone product or embed it deep into vertical solutions. Otherwise, you go all the way down to the infrastructure layer. In China, you need something that can serve as a universal platform, and the only thing that fits is chips. You either go up the stack or down to the foundation. It's incredibly hard to do middleware in China. There is basically no commercial viability for it. And that's where Kai comes in. His vision was just massive. He would always say that while the concept of an operating system changes from era to era, it ultimately always comes down to chips plus an OS. Historically, we had Intel and Windows, then Qualcomm and Android, and later in deep learning, NVIDIA and CUDA. The next era is really about inference in the physical world. Logically, you need one company building the chips and another building the operating system to drive this era forward faster and at scale. Kai's ambition was incredibly inspiring. To join a mission that feels like you could dedicate your entire life to it, that's actually a tremendous privilege.
It sounds like a place where a founder's ambition could truly find a home.
Exactly. Ambition isn't about whether the vision ends up being worth $1 trillion. It's about knowing from day one that this is something you can work on for 20 or 30 years and still keep going. That's one of the happiest things a person can find in a lifetime.
Was there a specific moment or something Caillou said that really won you over?
Two things. One was Kai mentioned a book called Finite and Infinite Games. I love that book too. He said entrepreneurship is essentially an infinite games. Finite games are zero-sum. It's about winning or losing, and the rules are preset. Infinite games are played in markets with no rules, which makes them far more worthwhile. That's the most valuable part of starting a company. The other, more emotional one, in 2019 when we did a strategic contraction and layoffs, no one knew whether Horizon would make it. But with that vision and that big picture mindset, I felt like I could go all in with Kai and give it a real shot.
Was AIoT something you wanted to do? Or was it something the company wanted you to do?
Both. What I love doing, and this includes robotics now, is essentially turning what I build into things I can use in my daily life. I didn't drive back then, so I had no connection to cars. What I really wanted was for all the various small appliances at home to have something to do with me. Going home for Spring Festival and bringing my parents a little gift I'd worked on. That's what made me happy. AIoT fit that perfectly. Small stuff, maybe not worth much money, but it gives people real happiness.
Fast forward to late 2019. I know there was a massive shift when Horizon began scaling back its non-automotive businesses. I was directly involved in that experience, so today I want to walk through what was happening behind the scenes. What was the context for that strategic decision?
If you really trace it back, it wasn't a snap decision made at the end of 2019. Horizon's cash flow was extremely healthy at the time. We had plenty of money in the bank, could have coasted for another 2 or 3 years doing nothing. The core issue was that we realized AIoT wasn't about selling chips. We were taking chips, building them into complete devices, then building full solutions on top. We were becoming systems integrators. That felt deeply wrong to Kai and to a lot of us. To put it bluntly, even if AIoT had been doing phenomenally well revenue-wise, it wouldn't have been something we felt proud of. It didn't align with our values.
The result was that a division of several hundred people got cut down to a few dozen. Can you walk through what you were thinking and dealing with day to day during that period?
Honestly, I didn't agonize much over the layoff process itself. The pressure after the layoffs was actually worse than the layoffs. Why? These days, outsiders often know more about what's happening inside a company than the people inside it. We started getting emails and WeChat messages from the outside. Are you shutting this down? Are you still working with us? Internally, even the people who stayed were good people, but they were anxious, hedging their bets, looking for other opportunities. Then right after the cuts, January 2020 hit and so did COVID. A lot of our Shenzhen team couldn't come back after Spring Festival. Everything had to be done remotely. Business travel was a mess. The pressure was enormous.
How were you thinking during that time? In that kind of under siege state, how did you land on consumer robotics as a direction?
In 2020, we hadn't decided to go all in on robotics yet. Our team is pretty resilient. We won the top customers in every direction. IP cameras, video conferencing, education recording, automotive aftermarket, automotive NVR. We mapped out 8 major directions. I remember feeling pretty proud at the time. Year 1 felt more like a pure chip company playbook. Sell wherever you can.
So the logic was, unlike before 2019 when you built solutions across many industries to generate revenue, you were now product-focused, identifying leading customers in a few key sectors.
Right. Vertical solutions were no longer evolving. The product was centered purely on the chip itself, on our core capabilities, chip plus algorithm. Those were the only 2 things we used to find directions. We mapped out 8 directions, but honestly, it wasn't about finding directions. It was about asking, what can this chip do? It wasn't about matching this particular chip to a market. It was about which industry could align with our long-term strategic roadmap. After all, a chip company doesn't survive on 1 generation of product. You need 3 to 5 generations before you can really establish yourself in an industry. If you're only thinking about this generation of product in an industry, and your customers won't use what you want to build next, you can treat it as a sales activity, but you shouldn't treat it as a strategic choice. Later, we drew up a business decision framework. First, the industry has to be one that keeps pursuing and developing AI. If it doesn't, it's just a short-term sales play, not a strategic choice. Why? Because we're an AI company. AI is our core competency. If an industry's demand for AI converges after 1 year and stops there, then a year from now, they won't need us anymore. From a business outcome standpoint, that inevitably turns into red ocean competition and price wars. They don't need what we're good at. We shouldn't pick that. Also, I think the essence of entrepreneurship is choosing a market that's still small today but has huge potential and low penetration rather than one that's already massive. A startup should never think it has what it takes to challenge the giants. Don't kid yourself.
What you're saying is don't go after large existing markets. Focus on an incremental market with real potential. Is that why you gradually converged on consumer robotics?
Right. At the time we built a framework, the demand for AI was only going to keep growing. Even though our chip's edge compute was already the largest in China, it clearly wouldn't be enough. Future demand was just too high. It's highly real-time. You have to give people real-time positive or negative feedback, unlike many AI scenarios that run offline. Generally speaking, systems without real-time feedback don't demand much from AI, or there are plenty of other ways to get the job done. Robotics had the more obvious demand growth, and the tech at the time wasn't great either. We'd looked at a few adjacent perception technologies, but what we could actually deliver was a pretty mediocre experience. There were no large models yet, and consumers didn't really need it. They thought a remote control was way easier than talking. The tech and PMF just weren't there at that stage, so we gradually focused on robotics.
Going back to 2020, you were exploring several emerging directions including consumer robotics. How did you find Ecovacs, and how did you convince them to use your chip?
Luck probably accounts for more than half of it in startups. We believed robotics was definitely a future direction, and at the time the biggest robotics market was robot vacuums. We couldn't just talk to Ecovacs, we had to reach out to Roborock, Narwhal, Dreame, all of them. It just so happened that Ecovacs was still the market leader in 2019 and 2020, and they were at an inflection point where they wanted to break through to the premium segment. To go premium, they needed to add AI. And our company didn't just provide chips, we spent a lot of time sharing AI know-how with customers. How to choose an algorithm framework, how to train models, these are things where our expertise had real value for the customer. A lot of our people came from autonomous driving backgrounds. It wasn't that our algorithms were more advanced, but our practical know-how was ahead of what most robotics customers had at the time. That alignment was what made it work. Why do I say luck? Of course, we wanted to work with Roborock and Narwhal too. They're great companies. But at that specific moment, Ecovacs was the leader and premiumization was their strategy. So a lot of it was luck, but you have to have all the ingredients ready first. Then you wait for luck.
You had just gone through layoffs. The team had shrunk dramatically. Why would Ecovacs believe your solution could solve their premiumization and intelligence needs?
I don't think they believed us at first. We first engaged Ecovacs in August or September 2019. They wanted to do depth recognition, obstacle detection, things like that. Our chip wasn't even out yet, so we co-developed a POC with them, a depth detection application using visible light deep learning inference. The POC only proved one thing to Ecovacs. We were willing to work with them and our partnership would be solid. Because in B2B, even if you have a great conversation with the CEO and the strategic direction aligns perfectly, when it gets down to the engineering team, they still have to run all the tests. The process went through countless rounds of testing. It wasn't until the end of 2020 that Ecovacs formally greenlit the project and said the X3 chip was viable for productization. That took a year and a half. And right after that, 2021 brought the chip shortage cycle. We didn't have a chip shortage. Our volume was small. Our capacity was limited, so we were fine. But all the peripheral chips were short. Working with Ecovacs, we were short on power management chips. Power management chips can be built with different solutions, and we must have prepared 6 or 7 alternatives for this. With Ecovacs, they would pick solution A, get halfway through, and the parts would run out, so they would switch to B. Then B would run out too. We were running 5 or 6 solutions in parallel. This was during COVID too. We had a young engineer from Nanjing stationed at Ecovacs, basically living there, helping them through it. That period was about proving our product, but also about building a real partnership forged in the trenches. That's how it finally came together.
So to summarize your success at the time, first, Horizon had strong algorithm foundations, and the algorithm demos resonated with Ecovacs, who wanted to move up market and add intelligence. Then with the X3 chip, you solved the full set of problems a production-grade chip needs to handle, but the product ultimately shipped on Ecovacs' flagship because you gave each other full partnership and support during the hardest moments. I remember this vividly. In the second half of 2020, when I was leading Horizon Series C1 investment, I was the lead investor, so I was the first to do detailed interviews and due diligence. That's when I met Cong Wang through Kaiyu. Frankly, at the time, most investors in the market only cared about Horizon's automotive business. The AIoT division was either ignored or seen as extra baggage. a distraction that made the company less focused, not adding enough strategic value to the core direction. But I had a very different read. I felt that what Cong Wang and the team were doing had enormous long-term value. Looking back at 2020 to 2023, the department's name changed several times. Can you share the thinking behind each change?
The first change came when we chose between robotics and human-computer interaction and picked robotics, but we still had to serve a lot of legacy customers. One thing that gave me real positive feedback was that even though our research direction shifted more toward robotics, not a single legacy customer stopped working with us because of the strategic shift. Many of them are still our customers today. The collaboration is great every year. Another positive surprise was discovering that so many people in this ecosystem in China, people who had never worked in robotics before, have gone to start robotics companies. Because of the relationships we built, we keep working with them after they become founders. In 2021, we were still operating mostly as a pure chip company, just selling chips. By 2022, we started calling it the robotics division because we were doing so much more. After surveying the robotics industry in 2021, we found that every customer's R&D process and toolset was completely different, all over the map. Everyone was hacking open source projects, cobbling together their own tools. The industry had zero standards. Startups can actually thrive where there are no standards, especially when you're playing the supplier role. That's a good market. It's counterintuitive. A lot of people want to enter markets where there's consensus, but startups should actually target markets without standards. A market with no standards is where you have a shot at becoming the standard. That's the counterintuitive thing about entrepreneurship, just like not going after existing markets. In 2020, we brought in Ho Chen-Xiu, founder of Guiwei Home, to Horizon. We built a customized fork of ROS, a new operating system, and gradually accumulated these tools. Looking back, the broad strategic framework was already set in 2022. We've basically been executing within that framework ever since.
So from the AIoT division to the robotics division, you saw more entrepreneurs and innovators converging around robotics needs and scenarios. There were real pain points to solve: lack of effective development environments, lack of easy-to-use tools. These were problems the company wanted to tackle in an emerging market, and that's the direction you wanted to converge on. Can you look back at the first product, the RDK-X3 chip and its dev board? How do you evaluate that generation?
With what I know now, honestly, it was pretty rough. If I rebuilt it from scratch today, it would be 10 times better. But that's normal. In another 3 or 4 years, I'll probably think what we're building now is rough too. Looking back, what did the team actually accumulate? A few things. 1, even though the product had plenty of flaws, it could hold its own at that stage. 2, the team had grit. When the chip fell short, we'd tweak the algorithm. Software compensating for hardware, patching this and that. Eventually, we'd make it work. 3, even when the product had real weaknesses, the sales team still managed to pull it off. I'm actually proud that the flaws in every past generation have almost all been fixed in the next. That matters a lot.
I actually want to add something here. If you go back to 2020 and 2021, a lot of industry peers saw D-Robotics, or our division, as a pure chip company. They compared RDK-X3 against other solutions on pure chip specs. This was our first truly mass-produced chip, and from a pure chip standpoint, we were at a significant disadvantage. So how did you convince or even win over these very demanding customers? How did you get them to iterate and grow with RDK-X3?
From the customer's perspective, those doubts were completely natural. A lot of the time, we only discover the chip's real strengths through working with customers. So the first customer is incredibly important. How they used it, what problems it solved. That signal gets relayed to other customers, and that's when they see the value.
Can you share what the first real functional breakthrough was?
It was still the recognition, depth analysis, and segmentation that Ecovacs needed. These algorithms look simple now, but in 2020, the challenge was running dozens of small models, maybe 50 or 60 simultaneously on a single chip. The technology wasn't mature. There was no segment anything back then. Every category was its own small model. The question was how to string all these small models onto one chip and still run them efficiently. A robot vacuum needs to recognize a ton of things. Getting that to work was the breakthrough at the time.
I remember that before 2020, robot vacuums were pretty unintelligent products for most users. When Ecovacs launched their product with your chip, the compute power was at least 10 times ahead of comparable products on the market. But the reason no one else had higher compute wasn't because they couldn't. It's because no one knew how to use AI compute and AI features in a robot vacuum scenario yet. If you look back at the intelligence, premiumization, and multifunction upgrade of robot vacuums over the past few years, it probably started with that first product you and Ecovacs launched together.
Right. Here's something fundamental about semiconductors. If you look at past categories, every category had great chip companies. Why did Nvidia end up becoming truly great? Compare it to Intel or Qualcomm. Mobile chips mostly served the phone market, meeting demand and iteration needs, but they didn't create new demand.
Or create entirely new demand.
Exactly. But Nvidia's playbook, the whole ecosystem approach, is about catalyzing demand. A lot of demand didn't even exist. A bunch of professors tinkered around and suddenly it became a demand, and that demand happened to emerge on Nvidia's platform. So Nvidia has been leading industry breakthroughs. The market cap gap between those companies is massive. In the past, including many chip companies in China, most were focused on meeting demand. To pick up on what Peter just said, why were robot vacuums stuck at row 5 tops, 1 tops? Because no one in the market was telling us this market would need that much compute. Everyone was just meeting demand. In the end, D-Robotics wants to be a company that drives demand creation. So we can't just make chips. We have to build the ecosystem, algorithms, cloud platforms, and use software to generate more demand. Otherwise, you're just a company passively responding to demand. You can do that, but it's not as sexy.
During those years, I also noticed something interesting. More and more innovative consumer robotics and consumer hardware startups were using D-Robotics chips. That was a very interesting signal for me as an investor in robotics and smart hardware. At the time, D-Robotics' chips didn't have clear advantages over traditional chips in terms of maturity or cost. But these startups were willing to try them anyway, which told me they cared about their innovation capabilities, their AI capabilities. For me, that's also an important indicator of whether a team has ambition and creative drive.
I've always felt the same way. As a fellow entrepreneur, you want to play with A players in the future. A lot of our current partners come share product ideas with us. And honestly, sometimes I think, how is this going to sell? Where's the demand? But the team itself is strong, and I believe teams like that can iterate and evolve. Choosing customers matters. There are 2 categories. One is the biggest players in the market right now. That's your base. Of course you work with them. That's business. The other side is actually a lot like VC investing. You're betting on people. We still use that methodology today. Internally, we're constantly discussing which startups look more promising, how we analyze them. We're iterating that methodology ourselves. At its core, entrepreneurship is about whether you see yourself working for revenue or working for future incremental growth. That's a CEO mindset question. If you're working for future growth, you're thinking about these questions every day. You're not thinking about how many orders this customer is placing. You're thinking about finding A players. A players might have some imagined need for the future of robotics, and they'll bring that to you. That helps you refine the chip better. They bring back imagined future demand to us. That point is incredibly important.
I can share something here too. This is exactly why I value these conversations with Cong Wang so much. The work you do is very similar to what we do as VCs, identifying new demand and new customers. If it's an existing lead or an existing market, there's a standard SOP. You hand it to sales or BD and they can convert it. But for a startup, the real challenge is identifying the next inflection point, the next growth driver. That's what we as VCs think about every day. Every time I see an especially interesting company or opportunity, I immediately share it with Cong Wang. For this kind of innovative business, you can't really delegate it. Innovation has to be a CEO level effort.
Right? I'm still learning because there's so much more innovation now. It's really different from 3 or 4 years ago.
Over the past few years, I've worked very closely with D-Robotics and with Cong Wang. We're both hyper-focused on what new opportunities and companies are emerging in this space. We want to be the deepest, closest partners when these companies are still early, still in their infancy. We know the company chose to spin off at the end of 2023. You had just come through your darkest period, broken into leading customers like Ecovacs and Narwhal, and hit million-unit shipment volume. At that point, why did you decide to spin the robotics division out as an independent company?
The reason is simple. Even though robotics was growing pretty fast, it was still tiny compared to autonomous driving growth inside Horizon. In that context, if you really wanted to make robotics work, the additional investment required was enormous. More chips, more talent, organizational adjustments that might be completely different from autonomous driving. Because autonomous driving is naturally a large enterprise play, the brand is a strategic, large B2B brand. Robotics isn't, it's all smaller customers. Even compared to automakers, they're small b. It's a broad developer ecosystem and brand. Only by becoming an independent company could it really work. Whether in terms of resources, hiring, or brand, being independent is faster than operating inside. And that's played out. These 2 years since D-Robotics spun off, we've grown faster than we expected.
What's the relationship with Horizon after the spin-off?
I think going forward, don't think of Horizon as a single company. Think of it as a fleet, a carrier in the middle, surrounded by destroyers, cruisers, all kinds of vessels. The two companies are very independent now. Technology is independent. Operations are independent. But we're still one system.
Let me ask a technical architecture question. D-Robotics chips and Horizon chips both share a similar BPU architecture. Does that mean you might end up with something like Intel or ARM, where the underlying chip architecture is shared, but each product line serves different market segments?
Right. It's like building a house. Autonomous driving might be a 4-bedroom. Robotics needs a 3-bedroom, but the core structural foundation is largely the same. In the long run, Horizon could evolve into something like ARM plus Android, and D-Robotics could become the NVIDIA of the robotics world. One focused on underlying IP, the other on chips plus an operating system layer.
I remember that after the spin-off, your first official product was the RDK X5 chip. Over the past year or so, it's achieved really remarkable commercial results. How do you evaluate it now? Comparing RDK X5 to RDK X3, where's the biggest leap?
RDK X5 is a massive step up from RDK X3, roughly the same cost for double the performance. Pretty much all the pitfalls we learned from RDK X3 were avoided. Of course, looking at it now, there are still plenty of issues. We'll launch RDK X7 around the end of this year, which will fix a lot of RDK X5's problems too. It's all iterative, step by step. RDK X5 had a lot of product improvements, and we also caught a good wave. 2024 and 2025 feel like another mass innovation cycle, like what we saw 10 years ago. The momentum is there, and we've been pretty relentless. We've basically served every kind of robotics customer there is.
From a product definition standpoint, why do you think RDK X5 has been so successful over the past 2 years? Was there a unique definition advantage?
One factor was that RDK X3 had already built up a customer base, and those customers gave us a lot of input. But defining a robotics chip is actually incredibly hard, because if you design a chip for just one industry, the volume isn't enough to sustain a chip company. You can't hit critical mass. So robotics chip definition has to aggregate the common needs across several different product categories and land on one chip. The trade-offs are endless. And the real question behind the trade-offs is, are you willing to add just a little more performance? And it's not about the cost math, it's about who you're serving, the future incremental market, or the current installed base. Here's how I think about it. If you define the specs to fit demand perfectly, you get better cost performance, and that chip is better suited for the existing market. If you spec it slightly beyond current demand, it's the future-oriented customers who are more willing to adopt it. At that point, it really becomes a judgment call. Which customers do you want to serve? From a 2024 perspective, RDK X5 was slightly oversupplied in performance, but that oversupply is exactly why we've been so embraced by innovative customers.
Let me share why I led D-Robotics' first round when the spin-off happened in 2024. The logic was pretty straightforward. In 2020, I led Horizon Series C1. I had very close working relationships with the team and with Cong Wang. I watched you build a robotics business from scratch to millions of units shipped. The decision to spin it out made total sense to me. There's a classic business theory called the innovator's dilemma. It describes how industry leaders incubating new businesses or divisions inside often get undermined because company strategy and resources concentrate on the core business. Emerging businesses inside struggle to get enough resources, and there's no good incentive or measurement system for them. So spinning D-Robotics out laid the foundation for 2 years of fast, independent growth. I remember the spin-off financing in early 2024 was pretty tough.
Right, it was hard. Most investors didn't know me personally. It was a first meeting, so there was no track record, no trust. Plus, the macro environment was pretty grim that year, and Horizon Robotics was still a private company. To spin off a loss-making entity from a parent that hadn't even gone public yet, from an average investor's perspective with no basis for trust, they wondered if this was some kind of financial engineering. Completely understandable.
I remember in early 2024, RDK X5's product definition and tape out were already in progress.
Right, yes.
But it hadn't turned into commercial results yet. For me, because I've been following robotic startups for so many years, I was very aware of the problems left over from RDK X3. I knew RDK X3 was a 4 or 5-year-old chip by 2024 at the end of its life cycle. The company urgently needed a new generation to fix gross margin and cost structure, but most investors in the market probably didn't have that foresight. I noticed Insta360 Camera launched a new drone product using our RDK X5 chip. That should be our first mass production customer in the drone space. How do you see the consumer drone opportunity for D-Robotics?
Well, consumer drones have always had a giant incumbent. It's hard for other consumer companies to break in, but the market objectively exists. Drones will have significant AI demand in the end, and that's evolving. Of course, drones have their own constraints, weight, regulations, and so on. They're even more sensitive to compute and power than embodied robots. You can't use a chip with that much power consumption or that much compute. That actually forces faster technology evolution. And Insta360 happens to be a very innovation-driven company. They never want to build me-too products. So the partnership is very clear.
Right. Drones as a form of robotics also carry a lot of promise. I remember Jensen Huang mentioned in a talk that he sees 3 massive robotics opportunities in the future: autonomous vehicles, humanoid robots, and drones, flying robots. Today, whichever company is exploring the drone space is essentially moving existing human-controlled, human-piloted drone products toward greater intelligence and greater autonomy. It's actually a very similar upgrade path to what we saw with robot vacuums, robotic lawnmowers, and other smart integrated products before. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some unexpected surprises from D-Robotics in this space. One more question on the spin-off. It's been exactly 2 years since you became independent in 2024. What's the biggest difference between being a standalone CEO versus running a division inside Horizon?
My thinking has changed each of these 2 years. When we first spun out, fundraising wasn't that smooth. Unlike today, where fundraising feels almost too easy. At the start, it was pretty mentally taxing, but that period helped me grow a lot psychologically. No matter how hard the capital markets get, and Kai and I have talked about this a lot, the most important thing for a company is never fundraising. Money matters, sure, but it's probably the least important thing. You have to get your mindset right. A hero on a mission doesn't chase rabbits. Another thing, at our January strategy session, we realized D-Robotics is facing a new problem. We used to be a small team with a simple product line, just RDK X3 and RDK X5. Now we have 4 chips in mass production, X3, X5, S100, S600. We're also working on the RDK X7 family, which has 3 chips, plus derivatives, dev boards for each chip, different algorithm combinations. The software combinations are exponential relative to the hardware plus the cloud platform. By SKU count, it's incredibly complex. And that complexity means I can no longer make granular decisions inside the company. So sometimes my colleagues think I'm just talking in abstractions now. And honestly, I kind of am. At this stage of development, you need to cultivate and promote more talent who can independently own sub-SKU strategies. The broad strategy is easy to set, but the detailed product strategies for each subline are the challenge we're facing now.
So like any startup, you need your own management system.
Right, exactly.
Cong Wang just talked about the changes after the spin-off. One of the most important changes is that some core technical talent from Horizon's autonomous driving team started joining D-Robotics. Wei Sui is a perfect example. Welcome, Dr. Sui, to the conversation. Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Wei Sui. I'm currently responsible for algorithm R&D at D-Robotics. I joined Horizon in January 2019, working mainly in the platform technology department on 3D vision algorithms. It's actually a funny coincidence. The depth estimation project for Ecovacs that Song just mentioned was my first project at Horizon. I was working overtime during National Day holiday in China. Spent several months building a complete demo. Later, I moved to the autonomous driving direction. By 2023, I had basically built out the BEV solution prototype and could see a viable path to deployment. When D-Robotics decided to spin off at the end of 2023, I moved from autonomous driving to robotics. I built a team from scratch, handled the technical planning and roadmap, and have been at it ever since.
When you made that switch from autonomous driving to robotics at the end of 2023, how did you think through it? Was it a hard decision?
I was honestly facing 2 choices. 1. Horizon was also making massive investments in advanced autonomous driving internally. I still had room to grow there, and my leader at the time respected my technical abilities. On the other hand, Cong Wang had already talked to me about this around June 2023. I had spent the previous few years entirely in autonomous driving. Jumping to a new field instinctively creates resistance. But I eventually clarified 2 things. First, in the short term, at the alpha level, autonomous driving and robotics can be easily confused. But at the beta level, robotics technology is still in its very early stages. Also, the AIoT division hadn't spun off yet at that point, and I had gotten a feel for the team atmosphere. It was pretty good.
What's the biggest difference you feel moving from Horizon to D-Robotics?
First, the 2 phases are completely different. Horizon already has significant scale. Autonomous driving has a strong installed base. It feels more like a mature system and company. At D-Robotics, everything is built from scratch. The work dynamic is totally different. At Horizon, a lot of things were already determined. The people you interface with were mostly technical folks up and down the algorithm pipeline. The content and modules were set. At D-Robotics, it's essentially a complete restart. I'm deeply involved in planning many things. The people I face aren't just algorithms, they're sales, product, all these different functional departments. That's a massive challenge for me.
Or let me put it this way. In autonomous driving, the hardware itself is relatively mature. Customer needs are converged. At D-Robotics, customer hardware forms aren't particularly converged or mature. The scenarios and demands are wildly diverse. So, does that mean a lot of the experience accumulated in autonomous driving can't be directly reused in embodied intelligence?
I don't think so. From a consumer robotics perspective, even though hardware forms differ, the functions are basically similar. Looking at it from a robotics angle, it's a few core functions: human-computer interaction, navigation and localization, control and perception. So from that perspective, although robot forms vary widely, the algorithm modules are all reusable.
So what can be reused?
You just mentioned the robotics perspective versus the AI perspective. Autonomous driving still falls under the robotics perspective. From that angle, you're thinking about whether hardware is mature, whether models generalize, whether they can deploy, how to build data flywheels. The embodied intelligence has another perspective, the AI perspective, or the large model perspective. From that angle, you see the endgame. Embodied intelligence could eventually become a super smart terminal, with AI playing the brain role and building out the ecosystem. That's a perspective autonomous driving can't give you. Most consumer robots, including cars, only complete one task, single task. A car drives, a lawnmower mows, a vacuum cleans. They're all single task robots. Embodied intelligence needs to solve for generality. And only embodied intelligence has the potential to become a terminal that replaces computers or phones.
Let me ask Cong Wang, how did you convince Dr. Sui to join?
We've known each other a long time. We were already close. I just shared a lot of my past thinking with him. What do you want to be doing in 10 years? Why not start building in robotics now? That's how history always works. Success 10 years from now depends on choices you make today. Who's smarter than whom? In this industry, it's not about who got in earlier on something. You just show up and do it.
We just walked through D-Robotics' full 7-year history from 2019 to today. If we zoom out even further, as an investor, I often ask myself, how big is the endgame here? NVIDIA spent 2 to 3 decades continuously opening new markets, creating new ecosystems, becoming a trillion-dollar company. Looking at D-Robotics' story today, I sometimes wonder, could this be the next opportunity at that scale? How much value is there really in building robotics infrastructure or infra? How do you think about this?
For me personally, I don't often think about what the company's future market cap will be. I think robot intelligence might be endless. Even if in 10 years everyone has a humanoid, won't the next wave of robots go to Mars? Intelligence itself has no ceiling. Don't set an endgame for yourself. What is the ultimate endgame? Entrepreneurship itself is a way of life. What's the result? The process of forever pursuing results is itself the result. If the team can keep enjoying that state, eventually it will naturally become a great company.
Both Caillou and you have mentioned wanting to become the Intel of the robotics era. Can you expand on that?
Right? D-Robotics' current vision is to be the defining platform of the robotics era. It sounds abstract, but there's so much we could do in the future. Right now, it's just an SoC plus relatively simple middleware. The cloud platform toolchain is still just data-related annotation, generation, training, and so on. But imagine a future where there's a super intelligent robot with all kinds of capabilities as the central platform. There's so much that can be done. From a chip perspective, robots don't just need an SoC, they need peripheral components, simulation engines, world models, lots of tools. Think about it this way. The earliest version of Microsoft Word was basically just a notepad. It gradually evolved into a full suite of tools, fonts, typography, printing, and so on. Every piece helped with office work. Now with AI, Word is getting auto-generation features too. So as long as intelligence keeps advancing, the Wintel playbook can keep running.
Looking back at Wintel and even ARM in the mobile era, the rise of a computing platform in each era usually came from companies capturing the element that changed most in that era. Intel in the 90s, during the PC rise, fully exploited Moore's law. In the ARM era, as smartphones emerged, ARM offered far better energy efficiency than Intel. So with D-Robotics' massive vision of building the defining platform for the robotics era, what's your main lever or differentiator?
I think there are 2 points each on software and hardware. Starting with software, how do you make software iterate faster for robots? There's so much to do there. From serving robotics customers in the past, we really saw how many corner cases you have to handle to mass produce a robot. You run full system experiments, push a new algorithm version, put it on the robot to collect a batch of data, find out it doesn't work, roll it back. One cycle is extremely long. The software iteration paradigm itself needs major changes. NVIDIA has done a lot, but there's still plenty they haven't done. On the chip physics side, with Moore's law, process nodes are basically down to 2 nanometers, maybe pushing toward 1 something nanometers. It's kind of hitting a wall. But now with large models, the game is increasingly not about sole process nodes. It's about how to integrate large model memory with the main chip to deliver something new with better cost performance. There's no established technical approach for that yet, so that's a long cycle iteration path. NVIDIA owns both ends, the expanding software ecosystem and the cloud. Cloud has a natural advantage. If you don't have enough compute, you plug in another card. 1 isn't enough, 2 aren't enough, you build an array. How do robots solve that? A humanoid's torso is only so big. You can only fit so much inside. Battery and power are limited. So in the on-device space, there's still so much room to improve. Plus, there's a gap between digital world data and physical world data that's still very hard to bridge. Lots of exploration needed.
So it sounds like there's still so much to explore in true edge chip technology or compute and memory technology, and we're well positioned. Unlike companies focused purely on the cloud and the digital world, we're naturally operating with all the constraints and variations of the physical world. Speaking of which, can you share some updates and results on new technology progress?
From a chip perspective, our actual measured performance on typical embodied algorithms is roughly 2.5x to 3x faster than leading general-purpose GPU alternatives at the same accuracy. Meanwhile, on Wei Sui's side, we're internally working on algorithms like VLA and VLN. With many customers, we're co-developing and co-creating these technology deployments. Wei Sui, you can also share our progress on advanced algorithms.
Right now, we are focusing heavily on the VA direction. That might sound counterintuitive because we believe that in many scenarios, what people are actually using VLA for is single task execution. Even on the Robo-Challenge leaderboard, competitions are one task, one weight. If you want to ship something today, the most reliable path is VA. Of course, the two aren't contradictory. It's not that VLA doesn't work. VLA ultimately needs to solve for generality, but it's still in a very early stage. We believe VA is what can land first. That's the experience we brought from autonomous driving. We'll be releasing some VA results soon. What VLA solved last year, VA can achieve similar results at 1/10 the cost, both in training and data.
And it's not just the training and data cost. It's also about being able to actually run inference in real time on the edge device, right?
It's extremely fast, roughly 10 times the efficiency. VA models for specific tasks are small. VLA models are large. VLA is actually in a pretty awkward stage right now. If you want to solve for true generality, model capacity is far from a few billion or tens of billions parameters. It might need to be in the trillions, far exceeding what current VLMs or LLMs can do in the cloud. From a practical deployment standpoint, you can start with VA and gradually evolve toward a hierarchical VLA. That's a relatively reasonable path to AGI. I can give two directional examples. First is long horizon complex tasks.
Like folding clothes or packing, right?
Right, folding clothes or assembling parts. When we think about industrial deployment, we're constantly asking what tasks VA or VLA are actually suited for. A lot of current pick-and-place and insertion tasks, industrial automation can beat us hands down on those. For VA or VLA to land, they have to solve tasks that industrial automation can solve, where you absolutely need them. To summarize, there are two. The first is long horizon complex tasks or deformable objects, clothes, packages. There's no explicit representation, so you need an end-to-end approach like VA. The second is dexterous hands, too many degrees of freedom. You can't plan complex tasks with rule-based methods. That's when you have to use imitation learning.
So if I understand correctly, you've reduced the weight of L, which essentially means sacrificing some generalization.
No, generalization is fundamentally about data distribution. I'll make a call here. VLA won't outperform VA in autonomous driving. Why? Because in autonomous driving, you can't exactly discuss with the car how to drive while you're driving. The driver is looking at visual input, observing the scene, making decisions. What does that cause? The data distribution is extremely imbalanced between L and A. Forcing L in has very limited effect. We're seeing the same phenomenon in embodied intelligence. In these tasks, there's very little real L. It's mostly A. Since that's the case, introducing L at this stage doesn't bring significant gains. In many cases, VA actually generalizes better than VLA. It's all fundamentally a data distribution problem.
Let me ask you another question. Since you brought up the VA route from video to action, what's your take on the recently hot world model path?
I think it's a promising direction, but it depends on what problem you're trying to solve with it. World models themselves might be even harder than VLA, but there are things in world models that are worth borrowing. They can really boost VLA or VA model capabilities. For example, using a world model to generate features at future T-stubs. You don't need photorealistic images, but you can generate future features, mix them with current features, and fuse them to predict the next action. We've verified that this works very well. Another use is generating evaluation data with world models. That can play a pretty useful role at this stage and is practically feasible. But if you're talking about solving AGI, the world model path itself is also very long.
Back to our upcoming product launch, what do you think of the new S600? Compared to previous products, what transformative impact does it bring for customers or the market?
In terms of efficiency, it's a massive leap. Previously, a lot of demos ran on edge cloud hybrids or purely in the cloud. Some demos were actually running on dual 4090s behind the scenes. Some tried to split between edge and cloud because edge compute wasn't powerful enough, part in cloud, part on edge. But the actual results were very slow because tons of features were bottlenecked by bandwidth transferring back and forth. With S600, you can actually run VLM or VLA on the edge. Edge performance gets a huge boost.
In embodied intelligence, we're seeing Chinese companies iterate and innovate far faster than overseas competitors. So we're really looking forward to D-Robotics growing into one of the most important and influential players in this ecosystem. We've talked about technology and the industry. Finally, I want to come back to you personally, Cong Wang. You went from being a division head at Horizon to the CEO of a unicorn that has raised hundreds of millions of dollars. What does that change in identity mean to you personally?
Honestly, nothing particularly special. The problems I solve are different every year. In 2024, it was fundraising and customers. Last year, we basically weren't short on customers, so I started noticing organizational and management issues. Then I got into supply chain. This year, it'll probably be something different again. Every year, you face different hard problems, and after you get through them, the whole team levels up. I'm someone who lives pretty much in the present. I don't dwell on the past, and I don't cling to what was good before. I'm always thinking about what matters most right now, and just facing that.
As the CEO of a unicorn company, after 7 years of close collaboration with Kaiyu, what's the biggest influence or impact he's had on you?
Kaiyu and I are actually quite similar in many ways. That's why we've been so in sync all these years. Both of us tend to think in a begin with the end in mind way. When we think about things, we're chasing causes, not effects. We naturally believe results emerge organically from the process. We're always working on the inputs. Every discussion isn't about haggling over whether a number is 10 million higher or lower. It's about constantly asking what fundamentally drives that 10 million and then putting effort there.
Can you share a specific example of a conceptual shift or realization?
Back when I was running the division, I was very focused on whether something was right or wrong. Now I see that whether it's the algorithm experiments Wei Sui is doing or experiments in other departments, there is no right or wrong. Especially in exploration, if you can't tell the difference, you're probably in an ambiguous state. In ambiguity, you need a bigger picture, more inclusive mindset. Organizationally, you can't enforce strong results-oriented KPIs. You really have to distinguish internally between mission-critical execution and fuzzy exploration. You run two different mental models in parallel and they coexist.
I completely get that. If you're the leader of an emerging business and you don't have the ability to embrace uncertainty and change, it's very hard to pull the company toward more unknown territory.
The AI era has been a major shock to how I think about organizational management. In the past, the boss would figure out the strategy and cascade it down. But in the AI era, these innovative applications are generated bottom-up, organically. This era encourages all kinds of people to embrace new technology and experiment on their own. It shouldn't be the boss pressing down saying everyone embrace AI. That might be the essence of this era. How do you design company culture facing that essence? What do you encourage? What do you not encourage? That's something I think about a lot.
Cong Wang's summary just made me realize that as AI capabilities roll forward very quickly, we should build an efficient exploration and incentive system, give customers and users easier to use, faster to iterate development environments so that more innovation can keep emerging. As a closing question, I'd like to ask both of you, what are you most excited about or looking forward to in terms of technology and product changes over the next 1 to 2 years?
Internally, we've been looking at this too. What exactly is the scaling law for embodied algorithms? What are the indicators before the inflection point? We're still searching for that indicator. From a chip technology perspective, you need 100 billion parameter plus models to run well. That basically means building a server, a multi-GPU server, to run it. The compute, bandwidth, and memory capacity required behind that. How do you break through a cost performance breakthrough? Tokens are about to become unaffordable for ordinary people because token consumption keeps growing and it's expensive. The people who control tokens will make more money. The ultimate solution is when we can democratize this.
What about you, Wei Sui? What are you looking forward to or watching in the coming period?
From a technical perspective, the most exciting thing to look forward to in the next 2 or 3 years is definitely the convergence of the digital world. At the foundational level, if we find a way to pre-train the mapping between VL and A, the inflection point arrives. Essentially, it's about having a ChatGPT with action. Once that happens, the VLA path is basically viable. My thinking has shifted a lot recently. I used to see things from a robotics perspective. Now I've switched to an AI perspective. I'm very optimistic about the future. But how long the intermediate process takes, we don't know yet. It depends on when VL and A can connect.
Alright, we've been talking for over an hour today. My biggest takeaway from chatting with Cong Wang is that he's exactly like the company's Chinese name Digua, which literally means sweet potato. Grounded, full of life, able to grow in all kinds of environments and conditions, and nourishing everyone around him. Cong Wang went from being a division head overlooked by the market to building a unicorn worth $1 billion in 6 years. D-Robotics has become one of the most important infrastructure companies in embodied intelligence. Dr. Sui's joining also shows me that a great vision keeps attracting great talent. From autonomous driving to robotics, he chose a path with more uncertainty but also more imagination and bigger upside. That makes us even more excited about D-Robotics' goal of becoming the defining platform of the robotics era. This is exactly the kind of alpha founder Alphaist is always looking for, someone who sees value where others don't, and spends a very long time doing something great and hard enough. This is the Alphaist. See you next time.